Welcome to Dead Headspace. I am your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
Today, we are talking to the author and the founder and editor of Hard Case Crime, Charles Ardai. Say hi, Charles.
Hello, Charles.
And
the old jokes are the best.
Well, when we have Chuck on here, he's done it both times now. I say, hey, Charles, say hi, Chuck. I mean, he says hi, Chuck. So, yeah, that's a new one.
I've got an 11-year-old daughter. You got to tell dad jokes when you're a dad.
I'm almost there, but not really, because my son's only 2.5. Starting to talk now.
You can tell the jokes, but he won't say, "Oh, Dad," not yet.
He also won't roll his eyes, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the funniest man in the world right now for another year or two.
Yep, that's what you got. You got another year or two. Wait till he's 14.
So,
yes,
I want to ask what got you into crime, but before you dive into your answer, we're going to talk about his publishing company real soon. But for those that are not familiar, Hard Case Crime, it is it's got a little bit of everything. I mean, it's my personal take on the books I've read. Is there are aspects like, all right, blood sugar. Audio listeners can't see it, but I'm holding up Daniel Cross's Blood Sugar. There are aspects of horror. It's covering, Halloween, pretty much the buildup of that. Joyland, it's got aspects of supernatural elements, as does a few other of King's releases with you. And there's obviously a heavy hand on crime. Noir, and what you do with the covers is amazing. So that's just my preamble to the question I'll ask eventually with Hard Case Crime. But and I gotta say, like, if you didn't catch this, I'm very excited to have you on because of how much I love what you've done, man. It's a lot different. Yeah, it's a lot different than what a lot of publishers are doing. And not for nothing, but I do like to see a lot of focus on the older stuff that came before, as well as the newer stuff. So with all that being said, let's go back to what got you into crime fiction.
Right. Where did I start my misspent life of crime? Well, getting into crime fiction to start with, it's the same way everyone else did. As a kid, you read Hardy Boys, you read Sherlock Holmes. So that's how you get into crime in the first place. But at some point, I discovered these old paperback novels. And these were published between basically the end of World War II and maybe 1970 or so. They were generally cheap paperbacks, very skinny. They weren't 350 pages long. They didn't give you the childhood backstory of the characters. They just gave you some really tight, high velocity storytelling, usually with a painted cover. And the painted cover usually had a beautiful woman on it, sometimes a guy with a gun. And it was just an irresistible package. And the cover price was 25 cents. Now, by the time I was born, books weren't 25 cents anymore, but I found these old paperbacks on a shelf that my father had. And he had all the Brett Halliday, Michael Shane private eye novels with covers by people like Robert McGinnis and Robert McGuire. And then if I went into my grandmother's shelves, she had hidden in the back behind proper books in the front, she had Mickey Spillane. So I knew what she really liked to read: Mickey Spillane, Mike Hammer, private eye novels. And so I picked up these books and I fell in love with them. Now, fast forward 20 years. I had spent time, I'd written short stories for mystery magazines. That was something I was doing. I'd written for other kinds of magazines. And I took a break to do some stuff in the world of business. I started an internet company called Juno, which was fun. But at some certain point, Juno got merged with one of its competitors, and I was having drinks with a friend of mine named Max Phillips, who's a brilliant graphic designer, also an author, a novelist, but a brilliant graphic designer on top of that. And we were drinking and talking about stuff we wanted to do next. And one of us, I honestly don't remember which, said, you remember those old paperbacks? And we started talking about them. So why doesn't anyone publish books like that anymore? Books that look like this, that feel like this, that read like this, nobody's publishing them. And because we had a few too many drinks in us, one of us said, and this was me, why don't we do it? Why don't we just start our own line of books? Now, there are a million reasons you don't start your own line of books. It's a terrible idea. What a horrible way to make a living. But we were into it. And I probably would have dropped the whole idea, but Max came back to me 2 weeks later and he said, you remember that idea we had? And I honestly said, no, I don't remember. What idea? He said, well, that idea of starting our own line of books, I've dummied up some covers. Now, remember, I told you he's a brilliant graphic designer, and he showed me what these covers look like. And they're the covers that you love, covers I love. Everyone who has seen these covers has fallen in love with them because they look just like the covers from the 1940s and 50s. And when he showed me these covers, I couldn't say, drop it. It's not important. They looked so good that I said, okay, I'm going to take these out. I'm going to find a publishing company that's willing to work with us. We're going to bring back the old forgotten books from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. We're going to bring those books back, the best of them, not the average, the best, the ones that still read great today. And I bet we can get some current writers who would wish they had been born back then to write new books in that style. That's Hard Case Crime. That's where it came from. And I spent 3 years pitching it, found a lot of publishers who said, oh my God, I love what that looks like, but I'm not going to buy it. You know, it's too niche. It's only for collectors. There's some truth to that. And so they said, no, we love it, but no. And then finally I hooked up with a company called Dorchester Publishing. They don't exist anymore. They're out of business. You probably remember them for their horror. They did Westerns, but they didn't have crime fiction. And so I went to them and I said, hey, here's an idea. You have horror, Western, romance, even a few techno thrillers a la Tom Clancy. You don't have crime fiction. I know crime fiction. I don't know how to print books. I don't know how to source paper and ink, warehouse. You do all that stuff. I'll buy the books. I'll commission the art. I'll make these books great. You print them and let's work together. And they said yes. I couldn't believe they said yes to me because I'd gotten like 50 no's. And so that's where Hard Case Crime began. And so we came up with the idea in 2001, published our first books in 2004. And here we are 18 years later. It's almost 20 years. And we published like 150, something like 150 books.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, we actually there's so many points to cover there, but we actually had Don Daria on last season.
Oh, Don's great. Yeah. So Don was the horror editor at Dorchester.
Yeah, he's a real nice guy. And then Brian Keene, we had on too. And we've heard from listening to his podcast, we've heard all about Dorchester and that.
And how it went under. Brian was great about documenting it and holding their feet to the fire. Most of the people who worked at Dorchester were genuinely good people. Unfortunately, there seemed to have been a couple of bad apples somewhere in the bunch. I don't even know where. And the company sadly went under for no reason having to do with the paperback novels. I think they had magazines. They had other businesses and those didn't work out. But Dorchester was great. Now, what happened after Dorchester went under, we had published our first 66 books with Dorchester in the small pocket-sized format that was popular in the 40s and 50s. And suddenly we had no publisher. And so I went around to 5 or 6 other publishers. I think it was 6 publishers I approached. And I said, hey, I don't want 1 penny more than what Dorchester was paying, which, by the way, wasn't much. I'm not going to hit you up for more money, not 1 penny. I just want you to step into their shoes. That's it. And 5 of the 6 made us an offer, which was great. So what's the difference? The first time out of 20 or 30 approaches, only 1 yes. The second time out of 5 or 6, 5 yeses. And the answer was, first of all, we'd proven it. We'd actually printed the books. And the other was Stephen King. So somewhere along the way, Stephen King, I reached out to him and didn't expect to hear back. And he decided he wanted to write for us because he loved what we were doing so much, which was incredibly generous of him. He's an incredibly kind, generous man. And he liked what we were doing, wanted to support it. And he wrote a book for us called The Colorado Kid. And it became a New York Times bestseller the way all his books do. And when Dorchester went under and we had to get a new publisher, they knew that one of the books we published was by Stephen King. And that was enough, I think, to make them want to be in bed with us, want to be in business with us. And so we ended up working with a company called Titan Books based in the UK, also a fantastic company, really great partners. We've worked with them for more than a decade now. All of the books since 2011 have been published by Titan under the Hard Case Crime banner. They're larger size paperbacks, so the cover art is bigger, the text is bigger. When you get older, you need bigger type. And we've also done comic books with them, and Titan has been really a dream to work with. So I miss the guys from Dorchester. They were great, but I couldn't be happier working with Titan. They really are great.
Brennan, I want to tackle The Colorado Kid and his other 2 books with Hard Case.
Okay,
that's all right. Because me and Brennan are fans of all 3 of them, but I would like to, because I don't know if Brennan, maybe I did. I don't know if I actually asked you which of King's 3 which would be Colorado Kid, Joyland, and later. Which of the three are you a fan of? But before you answer, Charles, which one is your favorite if you have to pick?
If I had to pick, it would be Joyland. Joyland is a simply outstanding book. All three of them are terrific.
Yeah.
Each one is great in its own way. Joyland and Colorado Kid are set in the past, later set in the present. Later has the strongest supernatural element to it. Joyland has a more modest supernatural element to it. So if you're into that element, Joyland does have a psychic paranormal aspect to it, but later directly ties into the universe of it. So if you're a big King fan, that's going to turn you on. Later has recently been optioned to be turned into a TV show. We'll see if it gets made.
Nice.
If it does, I'm sure there will be a lot of fans of later coming from the TV show. Colorado Kid became the TV show Haven, which ran for 6 years on Sci-Fi, and I got to work on that, which was a real treat. My first and so far only time working closely on a TV show. I wrote some scripts for them, and I consulted on all the other people's scripts. So Colorado Kid and later both have a very special place in my heart. But if I had to pick one, Joyland just hits all the emotional notes just right. When you get to that final scene, if you're not in tears, I think you probably don't have a pulse.
That's almost what you said to me, Brendan, because he read it.
That is exactly what I said to you.
Yeah, really? That's great.
Yeah, no, I'm completely on board with exactly what you said. I think that there's so many lifelong fans of Stephen King that kind of divide his work into like pre-2000, post-2000 with kind of an upturned nose at the later stuff. And Joyland is just one of those gems from his newer works. That's not that many people are missing it. Nobody completely misses a King book, but I don't think it gets the recognition that it deserves. It really is one of his better books, especially one of his better recent books.
I totally agree. I think when you see people making lists of their top 10 King books, of course they put in The Shining and they put in it and all the classics, but I'm seeing Joyland crop up there. And I think with good reason. I think people really take it to heart. It feels a little bit like Shawshank Redemption to me, a little bit like Green Mile in terms of that sort of really powerful emotional thread, or other recent ones that I thought were really powerful. I thought Billy Summers, his last book, I think that's still the most recent one that came out. Billy Summers about the hitman who's got one last job to do. That broke my heart also. He's not a Vietnam vet. He's an Iraq war vet, and the war scenes are really powerful. So if you haven't read Billy Summers, that's a great one. You should read it. 11/22/63.
Oh, yes.
Powerfully.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a great book. So Steve keeps turning out really good books one after another. I'm dying to see the next one. I think the next one is Fairy Tale, which has a strong fantasy element. I haven't read it yet, but it's coming, I think, in the fall. And then after that, he's got a Holly Gibney novel with the character from The Outsider coming to star in her own book. I think she was originated in Mr. Mercedes, and then she's turned up in a bunch of the other books too. And so he's doing a book about her. And I don't know what else he's got cooking, but I have faith in him. The man keeps. You know what was another one? Revival.
Oh, the Revival's a great one. Yeah.
Scary book. I mean, really.
Yeah, that ending sticks with you.
That ending is. I'm not going to spoil it, but that ending is great. And by the way, the character in Revival spends some time traveling with the Carney from Joyland. So it's just a little Easter egg. So if you're a fan of Joyland, you'll find it mentioned in Revival.
You know what?
Now I'm sorry, Pat. I'm going to cut in real quick.
No, go ahead.
I'm really glad you mentioned Billy Summers, because I feel like that got a lot of hate.
Oh, really?
When it came out. I don't know. Maybe it was like strictly within the people who only read King as, approaching from the horror angle. Yeah. That could have been it, but I saw a lot of people, react negatively to it, and I loved it. The kind of reveal, if you will, at the end, I remember guessing at that, seeing it coming, and the way it was executed, like the fact that I kind of knew what was going to happen, it didn't take away from it at all. And to me, that's the sign of a good story. It's like, if I know where you're going and I, am there for the ride anyway, if I'm enjoying myself just as much as I would on a mystery tour, I mean, that's it. You've done something special.
I totally agree. I think one of the great measures of a good whodunit is if you can guess who did it and you still want to keep reading. Right.
Yeah, there you go.
And now this isn't a whodunit, but that's the classic example, because if it's just there for the puzzle and you guess the puzzle, then you don't like the book. Then you think, well, the author failed. But the best detective story is the one where, yeah, the puzzle's good, but it doesn't matter whether you guessed it because you care about the characters. You want to see what happens next. I can't listen to the Teddy Bear's Picnic anymore without thinking of that man dying. Stephen King just has, it goes without saying, just this enormous talent for making you care about his characters, and awfully quickly, within a page. Usually you read the first page of a King book and you're hooked. You care about those characters. And I look at that as a writer, I look at that and ask the question, how does he do it? What is it about the words he puts on one page that gets you hooked so fast? And his son does the same thing, by the way, Joe Hill. I don't mean to suggest he has only the one son, but Joe Hill writes in a very similar way and with a similar effect, such that one page into one of the Joe Hill books, you kind of you're hooked. You can't walk away. So I think there are a handful of writers like that. Lawrence Block is another one. We've published probably 10 books by Lawrence Block in our line. He's one of my favorite authors, and not as well known as Stephen King, of course, but what a fantastic writer he is. And that's part of the pleasure of Hard Case Crime for me. There are these writers whose work I know, books that I know. Sometimes it's just one book by a writer and everything else the writer wrote was not very good, but there's one that was great. Or it's a whole career worth of good books, and he's just not that well known anymore. And I love bringing that person back. So bringing back Wade Miller. Nobody remembers Wade Miller. Wade Miller wasn't even a person. Wade Miller was two people, two cousins, Bob Wade and I'm going to say Bill Miller. I may be wrong, but it's a man named Wade and a man named Bill Miller. They were cousins, and they wrote books that included Kitten with a Whip, that became an Anne Margaret movie, and Touch of Evil, which was originally called Badge of Evil, which became the Orson Welles movie. They wrote a book called Branded Woman. I fell in love with Branded Woman. It's a great read. It was written in 1953, I think, and you read it now more than half a century later, and it's on fire. Nobody had read this book in half a century. And I love the idea that I could pluck it off my bookshelf and bring it back, and thousands of people read this book that maybe they otherwise would never read. That's fun. That's exciting.
Man, I gotta pull down a book real after this, but I'm stuck on one thing, how we're talking about basically just like the unmatched prolificness of King's work, his production, and that's the stuff that gets published. I'm sure even he has stuff that are still getting trunked.
Maybe, although I think at this point, maybe not. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I haven't gone looking at his trunk, but
I don't know.
At one point, I was talking with him around the time. I've never told the story, actually. Around the time that we were promoting Joyland, I guess it was, and he said, "I've just written a book. I just finished it, and I'm thinking maybe I'll leave this one to be published posthumously." And I thought, that's interesting. But then he published it, and that was Revival. So I think the trunk may be empty. I don't know. I don't think he's leaving anything the way Agatha Christie did. She left 2 books behind for after she died. But who knows? Maybe you're right. Maybe there is something. The thing is, at this point, nothing goes in the trunk because nobody wants to publish it.
Oh, yeah.
If he feels it's good enough and he puts it out there, somebody will publish it. In fact, not only somebody, it's Scribner's his regular publisher, and they will gladly take, I think, as many books as he feels like writing. It's really a miracle that they allowed us. I mean, they and he together allowed us, but Scribner could easily say to him, "Listen, we're your main publisher. We spend millions of dollars, not just paying you for your books, but promoting them and marketing them. What do you mean you want to also on the side work with this little tiny house just because you admire them and like what they do?" They could easily have put up a fuss, and they didn't. And for that, I give them a lot of credit. It's obviously, I give 99.9% of the credit to Stephen King himself, who had the idea of doing it and stuck with us. And but Scribner also behaved like princes, and I'm very grateful.
See, this is exactly why I want more people that just aren't writers to be on the show, because me and Brennan, we're ardent fans of the industry, man, and the process. So thank you for that story. Sure. That's amazing. I was just going to say, We were lucky enough to have Peter Straub on last year, and I only bring that up because at one point I had asked him if there's going to be a third, if they're going to complete the trilogy.
Yep.
He said, I'm paraphrasing. I do not want anyone quoting me because it ended up on some Stephen King sites.
Oh,
I don't know how, but but I'm paraphrasing. But basically, he said that he tweeted that he's retired. Okay, so
I hadn't heard that. Okay, yeah.
So
I haven't talked to Peter in a while. I know he had some health issues, and I hope he's well. I admire him greatly, and I would have loved to do a hard case crime book with him.
I would love that as a fan of both of you.
Great. But it never came to be. So what are you going to do? You can't hit a home run every time you come up to bat. And there are definitely ones that got away, both authors and artists. Also, there were some artists that I would have loved to get a cover from, and by the time we reached them, they felt they were too old. They couldn't paint as well as they used to, and they didn't do it. And there's certainly authors in that category. Sure. Peter Straub would have been one that I'd love to have gotten.
Yeah, he said that Steve told him one time that if he couldn't write, he'd be on an overpass with a rifle. And I bring that up because that's the kind of drive he's got. Yeah, like any great athlete, that's their thing, and they're gonna beat the pants out of anyone that tries to go against them. And in this case, it's in every case, it's against yourself.
You're pushed by whatever demons are inside you, and demons are not necessarily the supernatural kind. They're the motivating force, right? And there's this notion from the old philosophers that there's the human body, and then inside there's a homunculus that lives inside and moves your arms and legs and so forth. Well, I think if you talk to a writer like Stephen King, but not only, they'll say they don't necessarily know where the force comes from that shoves ideas out from the brain through the fingertips onto the keyboard, but they keep coming. And as long as they keep coming, you let yourself keep going with it.
Absolutely. So we talked about this off air, but we do have a question from TJ Tranchel. He's a fellow author amongst many things, and he just asked, what is your favorite hard case crime cover? And there will be a link in the show notes for anyone that wants to see this. So Charles, what's your favorite cover?
Oh man, it's so hard to say. So I will give you some examples. So there was a painter who's not with us anymore. He died very young. He was only 52, named Glenn Orbick. He was a great comic book cover painter and a great cover painter for us. And he must have done a dozen or 24 covers for us. And Glenn did some of the very best covers. He did the cover for my own book, 50-1, which I particularly like, not just because it's a great painting in and of itself, but it's a painting of the editor of Hard Case Crime, not really me, someone much more handsome than me, sitting at a desk with a bunch of Hard Case Crime books on the desk. And he painted little miniature versions of a whole bunch of our covers, which is just this virtuoso act, because even if you see the original painting, which is hanging on my wall at home, he only had a few brush strokes for each of those little miniature covers, and somehow he made them look exactly right. So Glenn did that. He did Branded Woman, which I think is probably his single best cover for us, also the very first he ever did. But if you go onto our website and you click on Glenn Orbick under artists, you can see all of them, and they're just gorgeous. Robert McGinnis, I mentioned him before. McGinnis was painting in the 60s, maybe 50s as well. He's 96 years old right now. He's still painting. And he's most famous for painting the movie posters for the James Bond movies with Sean Connery back in the day. He also painted the famous poster of Audrey Hepburn with the cigarette holder and the cat on her shoulder for Breakfast at Tiffany's. And he painted 1,000 paperback covers back in the day, including my dad's favorites, the Brett Halliday books. And he came to work for us and paint covers for us. He also must have done 24 by now. He did my first book, my own first novel, Little Girl Lost. So I'm fond of that. But probably his best covers for us. Oh, it's hard to pick because he's so good. But Lawrence Block's novel, The Girl with the Long Green Heart, is a particular favorite of mine. He did an Ed McBain cover for us called Cut Me In, which is just gorgeous. His women look incredible. So that's McGinnis and Orbick. And then there's a painter named Greg Manchus. If you saw the Coen Brothers movie, The Ballad of Buster Scraggs, which I don't think too many people did see, it was a Western, a sort of episodic 6-episode Western. and maybe it wasn't Ballad, but Buster Scruggs. I think Scruggs. Anyway, the Coen brothers did, I think, for Netflix, an anthology movie with 6 separate stories, and each one opened with a painting, an old-fashioned painting of the Wild West, and Greg did all those paintings for them. He did covers for us, and his first for us, Fade to Blonde, is a particularly nice one. His cover for Michael Crichton's book, Grave Descend, was wonderful. And so between Orbic, Manchus, and McGinnis, you cover a lot of ground. More recently, we've been working with a painter named Paul Mann out in Utah. He did the cover for Quentin Tarantino's first novel, based on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Very cool.
And he's done probably a dozen for us as well. And his covers are gorgeous. So, I don't want to single out any one artist as better than the others, but these are fantastic cover artists. And if you just want to trip down memory lane for old-fashioned looking paintings, beautiful women, and situations of great peril, check them out on our website.
That's great. We have one more question. It's from the author of Don't Know Tough, Eli Craner, which off air and probably on air, I can't remember at this point. I can't stop talking about this book. It's a crime fiction book, and it's phenomenal. But
I've heard that it's absolutely stunning. The guy who wrote James Kestrel, who wrote 5 Decembers, which maybe we'll talk about a little later. Which
that's his question. He's gonna ask.
Oh, is it okay? So Kestrel tells me that Craner's book is outstanding. So I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to, because it's apparently one of the best that's out there right now.
I would say so. S.A. Cosby.
Yeah, Sean Cosby, sure.
I would be very shocked, and I don't say this lightly, I'd be shocked if Eli's career was not where Sean's is in a couple of years, man.
Really? Wow. That's really saying something.
I'm like you guys. I read a lot, and this one. Let me talk about super quick, because maybe sure. I'll hit bullet points. So basically, it takes place in the South. It's about this kid, Billy Lowe. He is very good at playing football, and says the title "Don't Know Tough" is basically you learn how Billy knows a tough life, and it's character driven. It's really sad, and it's about, in my opinion, fatherhood. Not a father and son, but in a generality, and that's my weak point. I guess because I have a kid now, but it's everything good that you ever want in a book, and it's going to sit with you probably forever.
I'm going to pick it up now. As soon as I'm off of your podcast, I'm going straight to order the book. Seriously, I've been wanting to read it for a while now, and I just keep forgetting to buy it, and now I'm not going to let myself forget. I'm going to go get it. That's great.
Please tell me what you think, man.
For sure.
You do it. So this is really cool. This is so cool. You know what? I just got to focus on one more thing about James and Eli. It's so cool because, like, all of us in the industry, we're like one author away from either knowing that person or we're talking about their art as if like we're kind of friends. And, you brought up James talking about Eli without knowing that Eli had a question about James. I just think that's amazing. And then at the same time, Don Winslow is commenting and saying how, how happy he is for their success so far. And great. I just saw Don last week at a reading in Pennsylvania, and he's so nice.
Oh, that's great. We tried to reach out to him. I don't know him. So I know a bunch of people in the field. I don't know Don. But when we were first putting together the trying to reach people about 5 Decembers, because James Kestrel is it's a pseudonym of an author who has published several books before, but this was a real departure from his earlier work. And nobody knows the name. Now they do. Before we published this book, no one had ever heard of the name James Kestrel because it was invented. It was a brand new name. So it was literally a name that nobody knew. And we were trying to reach out to authors. And one of the authors that James, I'll call him James, was very keen to reach was Don Winslow, but I didn't know how to get to him. And so I didn't manage to get the book to him before it was published. But I know it means a lot to the author. Having Don comment on it and be supportive just means a huge amount to him.
Yeah, man, he's just simply one of the best. Okay, so Eli, so he says, ask him about discovering James Kestrel and his failings when he first read the manuscript 5 Decembers. I'm about halfway through now, and ready to take a time machine back to the 50s in Hawaii. And you know what? I'm right there with him there and parts of Japan. I mean,
Yeah, it's an extraordinary book. So I wasn't looking to publish a World War II novel. It's not an area that I'm particularly keen on. It's not the main thing we do. I mean, a lot of our books are set around that time in the 40s, 50s, but that doesn't mean we deal with war specifically. You know, it's like a veteran who returned from war, but we don't generally do war stories. We do crime stories. So in comes this book from the agent. We get books a lot of different ways. Sometimes authors reach out to us directly. Sometimes agents do. Sometimes I go hunting down an author whose work I like and say, hey, you got anything for us? In this case, the agent sent it to us. And later I found out that before sending it to us, she'd sent it to 26 other publishers, all of whom said no, which is extraordinary because it's a masterpiece. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal book. And so I sat down to read it, hoping it would be bad, so I could say no quickly because I was busy. I think this was Thanksgiving. I was at my in-laws' house, and I just felt obliged to answer this query. I try to turn around any query I get within 24 hours. And so I start reading this book thinking, okay, it's going to be lousy because most books are in fact lousy. And the sooner if it's going to be lousy in the end, the sooner it's bad, the happier I'll be. And I started reading it and it wasn't lousy. And I was so angry. I was so frustrated. Can't it just get bad already? It's not going to be good all the way to the end. And so I kept going, got better and better and better. And there's this point that you hit in the middle of the book, and I won't give it away because it's a kind of spoiler. There's this point you hit in the middle of the book where the whole thing changes. It's not at all the book you thought it was going to be. It opens as a kind of LA Confidential style, James Ellroy style, a police procedural. You've got a cop in Honolulu, Hawaii. There are 2 dead bodies. He's investigating who killed these people. There's violence, there's action, gruesome stuff. And he's chasing a killer overseas. And you think that that's the kind of book it's going to be. Well, you're in for a surprise. So very often I hear from people and they say things like what Eli wrote to you. They say, I'm halfway through this book and loving it. And in fact, Stephen King is one of the people who wrote that. I'm halfway through this book and loving it. And whenever I hear that, I say, oh, you don't know what loving it is. You don't know, because the halfway point is the point at which the book takes a 180-degree turn and it becomes something very different. It stops being a mystery. It stops being a detective story for a while, and it becomes a story of survival, of pain, of love, of sacrifice. And it becomes this sweeping story set during the war that is just a human story in a way that the best novels are. And so this is like Hemingway. This is like the really great writing, great storytelling. And when the ordeal of World War II ends and the main character, it's not too much of a spoiler to reveal that the main character is still the main character after the war. When it ends, he feels so alienated and not a part of anything anymore. He's lost everything that mattered to him. And he has only one thing left to do, which is to solve this 4-year-old murder that nobody cares about anymore. So he comes back to Honolulu and he says, I'm gonna solve this murder. And they say, why? You know, we've just been through a world war. Millions of people were murdered. Millions of people died. What do we care about these two? But he has to solve it because he's got nothing else in his life. That's what he does. He's a cop. So it's an extraordinary book. I read it. Like any editor, I always find things to suggest and change and tweak, but it was clearly an extraordinary book. And I just had to persuade the folks at Titan. I choose all of our books, but I don't get to publish any of them unless I'm able to make the case to Titan that it's worth doing, because they're the ones who are, investing heavily in things like paper and ink and warehousing and shipping and Salesforce and all that. And I described this book to them and I said, this is one of the best books I've read in my life, period. It's probably the best book I've read in the last 5, 6, 7 years.
That's fair.
Period. And I'm not going to not publish this book, And when you find a book this good, you don't not publish it. That's what you do. You publish it. And so we did, but all along the way, it was like, it is great, but how do you convince people that a book is like, there are 1,000 books in the bookstore. I walk into a bookstore. I know there are great books there, but which one? How do I pick it up? How do I know which one to pick up? And this was a real challenge. And that's why we were reaching out to people like Don Winslow. But not only Don, we reached out to Dennis Lehane, who never gives blurbs. He's so busy. He's a very nice guy, but he just doesn't have time to do that sort of thing. And he kindly agreed to give a blurb. And that made a huge difference. Megan Abbott, who's a good friend and a phenomenal writer, James Fallows, who's a phenomenal journalist, And there were a number of other people who got behind it early on, and that made a big difference. And suddenly people started reading it. But the truth is, I went door to door in the internet age. Door to door is something different than it used to be. But I went to everyone on our mailing list and I said, I'm going to send you a free copy of this book. It doesn't exist yet. There are no physical copies. I'm going to email you this book. Please don't pirate it. Please don't give it away to your friends. But I'm giving it to you for free, and I'm going to do this. I don't care how many copies. I'll do hundreds. And I sent out the book and I said, listen, just read it. You won't be sorry. I promise you, you won't be sorry. If you're sorry, never trust me again. You're not going to be sorry. And the reaction was enormous. And bit by bit, word of mouth started to build. So it's like, when you're a poker player, when do you put all your chips into the center of the table? Either you're a bluffer and maybe you can win, or you really have a royal flush. Well, you don't get a royal flush very often. This was our royal flush. And I just put all my chips in and I said, this is it, and it just won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Novel of the Year. And I'm very proud of it. I really thought that Sean's book, Razorblade Tears, which is also outstanding and got a huge amount of attention and probably outsold 5 Decembers 2-1 or 10-1. I thought that was likely to win. And if it had, it would have been a deserving winner. But I was beyond ecstatic and proud for James that he won. It's a deserving book too.
Yeah, Razorblade Tears is definitely awesome. I see it in all the targets I go into too. But yeah, as far as James' book goes, what can you say besides you hit the nail on the head on every aspect? I mean,
Thanks.
It's got everything. I don't know what to add to that because all the right people have blurbed it, so or tweeted about it.
Yeah, but every voice counts. Part of what makes me so happy is when people who are not professionals say nice things about a book, or even better, when somebody who doesn't read, somebody says, I gave this book to my dad. He doesn't read and he fell in love with this book. That feels so good, and that's not to say that a blurb from somebody who gives a lot of blurbs isn't deeply meaningful, because it sure is. And it probably has a bigger impact on sales. But when I see somebody on Twitter say, I finally picked this up after hearing about it 8 times from 8 different people, I finally picked it up and man, you were right. That's a good book. It's like, why do we publish books at all? The average book, even the average good book, is it's fairly entertaining. It's pretty good. It's ingenious. It's clever. It has something good about it. But by definition, it can't be the case that every book is the best book you've read. It can't. But when you finally find one that is or is of that caliber, where you say, I'm not going to forget this book. I'm going to be on my deathbed in my 80s or 90s, and I'm going to be thinking about the best books I've read. This is going to be one of them. And when you finally find one that good, being able to put that into people's hands and give them that experience, that means a lot. That's why we do it. Nobody goes into book publishing to make a buck. All you're going to make is a buck. That's it, $1. And you can make more money doing almost anything else. Literally, I sit proofreading my books, and with the hours I spend, McDonald's would pay better, seriously. But I love it, and it's a book like this that really is why.
That's beautiful. And I was just there's some guys at my work where I talk about books too, and I was just talking to one of my buddies this morning. And it's the second time I talked about it. The last 2 days I've been telling him about 5 Decembers. And I said, dude, honestly, those books that literally make your stomach have jitters, like these excited feeling. This book did it. And I kept looking at the percentage and I'm like, this feels like the end. Holy shit. I'm only 50% through 6. And it just never stops being amazing. But it made me feel just 3 or 4 days, I think it took me to get through it, but because I do text to speech, so it's a lot faster than if it were the physical one. But I mean,
it's not a short book. I mean, it's not one of these monster doorstops that's 1,000 pages. Not to say that's bad. I mean, Stephen King's done a number of 1,000-page books and they're great. It's not that, but it's close to half that. It's 430 or something like that. And every page counts, and you don't wish it were shorter. You really don't. For
sure.
Love for the story to go on. People have said, could there be a sequel? I don't think there could be a sequel. I mean, there could. There can be a sequel to anything, but who needs it? It's a complete story. The story's done. And but I'm dying to see what he writes next. I really don't know what he's going to write next.
Me too. And you know, basically, I got so excited every time I was about to read it, and it's no secret for people that listen to the show, but Coco is one of my favorite books of all time, and this, like, I do not say this slightly. This is a book that goes on that shelf, that same shelf as Coco.
Thank you. No, I totally agree. Yeah. So look, somebody asked me the other day, in fact, it was a bookseller who said she's been selling a lot of copies of 5 Decembers, and what other books in the line would I recommend? Well, you know, that's kind of a layup question in the sense that I'm happy if you buy any of them. That's great. You know, I'll take the sales. But, you know, what are some other books that would give people that same reaction? I'd certainly put Joyland on that list, and I did. I don't remember exactly what list I gave her. I, you know, came up with 10 books because she wanted a top 10 list. And but there is definitely some original novels that we've published, reprints too, but there's some original novels that just, you know, people love, and rightly so. There's a book which Stephen King loved called Charles Gate Confidential, set in Boston in 3 different periods of time, in the 40s, the 80s, and the present day, all in the same building. And there's a crime from the 40s that is still haunting people in the 80s, and then new bodies start turning up in the present day. And it's a really clever, smart, emotional book. So that's one. If people read 5 Decembers, it's a very different book. It's not the same in any way, but Charles Gate Confidential by an author named Scott Von Dobiak might push some of the same buttons, and Joyland by Stephen King. I'll give you one obscure one here, just for good measure, because you guys said you like the reprints. So Joyland and Charles Gate Confidential and 5 Decembers were all brand new books written for us specifically, or we were the first publisher. There's a book called So Many Doors, which, by the way, is a weird title. So Many Doors by Oakley Hall.
And that's a new one for me.
Yeah. So who's Oakley Hall? Well, he was a writing professor in, I think, California. And his students included Anne Rice, Michael Chabon. I'm trying to think. There were 2 or 3 other, Amy Tan, like major writers, and he taught them. And he wrote novels himself. And he wrote a book called So Many Doors, which was from the 50s, I think, early 50s. And I picked up a copy and started reading it, and it knocked me for a loop, very much the way 5 Decembers did. And that's another one that's just that you're in tears at the end. When you get to the end, it's just so painful and so beautiful. So Many Doors by Oakley Hall. You can see it with, frankly, a fantastic Robert McGinnis cover, based on reference photos shot by Robert McGuire. Here's an interesting random tidbit for true trivia fans. There was a wonderful painter named Robert McGuire. I've mentioned him a couple of times in this interview. McGuire was no longer painting by the time we started Hard Case Crime, although I did get a chance to talk to him at least. And he painted a huge number of covers, all beautiful, in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And he painted from reference photos. So he would hire models, or he'd pose himself. For the male characters, he was usually the model himself. Female characters, he didn't go that far. So for the female characters, he'd hire models. And he had thousands of photographs, black and white photographs that he took of these women in various different poses, holding a knife, holding a gun, that he never used. You know, he took thousands of photos. He didn't do thousands of covers. So his daughter sent me some of his photos and said, do you think one of your current artists might be interested in painting a painting based on one of my dad's photos that he never used? And I went to Robert McGinnis, now 96 years old, and said, what do you think about this collaboration? They never collaborated. These 2 giants of paperback illustration. They never worked together. Said, why don't you take McGuire's old photo and you paint based on it, and it'll be a collaboration between the 2 of you. And it came out terrific. It's the cover for So Many Doors. It's kind of risque, kind of sexy. Beautifully painted. Anyway, that book is a heartbreaking book. The cover is a gorgeous cover. I don't see what more you would want out of life than a heartbreaking book with a gorgeous cover. That could be our tagline: heartbreaking books with gorgeous covers. And it's like whatever, $14, $12.95. I don't even remember what the price is. Probably these days on Amazon you can get it for $9.95. I don't know, but or ebook. I'm sure it's in Kindle. And that's an old book with some old-fashioned language and so forth, but what a fantastic read it is. So that if you want another recommendation, So Many Doors by Oakley.
Wrote it down.
You will never find on your own. I promise you. You will not wake up in the morning saying, hey, Oakley Hall, how about something? It'll never happen. So I'm happy to point you toward that book. You will not be sorry.
That's awesome. Another older one, I think it's from 63, Donald D. Westlake's 361.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put that in the same personally as the same as Five Decembers, but it's still
No, I agree.
it's a really, really good book.
I agree. So yeah, that one never had a paperback edition. He published it as a hardcover novel, and nobody ever wanted to put it out in paperback in this country. I think there was a British paperback, and so we got to be the first paperback. Don was still alive at that point, and I remember having a conversation with him, figuring out what to do on the cover, because all of our covers have beautiful women. Every one of them. That's not true. There's one that doesn't. A book called Witness to Myself. But there you go. So there's the cover. And I said to Don, the problem with this book, I love the book. The problem with this book is there are no women in it. There's not a single female character in the book. There are a couple of women in the background in some scenes, but there's no single character. And he said, well, that's okay. What difference does it make? Paint a painting. You've got your male lead, and have him walking down the street, looking morose. He's really deep in thought. He's miserable. And behind him on the wall, there's a billboard advertising lingerie. There you go. That's a solution. That's how you get a beautiful woman in. And we didn't do that, but we did do a scene where there's a party going on, and one of the women at the party is quite attractive. So there's my solution, or the artist solution. That's Rick Farrell, who's another great cover artist that did a bunch of covers for us. So yeah, 361 is great. If you like Westlake, he wrote both serious books and funny books. One of the funniest he ever wrote was called Help, I'm Being Held Prisoner. Help, I'm Being Held Prisoner is set in a prison, and there are these prisoners who have dug an escape tunnel, only they don't use it to escape. So they have a tunnel out of jail, like in Shawshank Redemption. They've got a tunnel out, and what they're doing is they sneak out through the tunnel, rob a bank, go back in through the tunnel, and now they're back in prison, and they've got the perfect alibi. They couldn't have robbed the bank. They were in prison. Anyway, that's the premise, and it's very, very funny. It's a hilarious book.
I can see that working as a comedy.
It works as a comedy, right? It doesn't make any sense as a serious book. And Westlake has a number of other really good ones. He has one called Double Feature, which is 2 novellas. And I think people generally prefer a single novel to 2 novellas, but these are great novellas. Both of them have been filmed. One is called, now of course I'm going to forget what it's called, but the book itself is Double Feature, and they both have movie connections. The second one is called Ordo and was filmed under that title, Ordo. The first one, which I can't remember the title of, was filmed with William H. Macy. The first one's very funny. The second's very sad. Great book, Double Feature. You won't go wrong with Westlake. All of Westlake's are really terrific reads.
That's awesome. Brennan, I've been hogging there. Do you have any questions that you'd like to throw out there?
I'd actually like to go into your role as editor.
Sure.
And, as a rule, that's going to be a very, very diverse experience. But with Hardcase kind of shooting for that lean and mean, old pulpy paperback feel, how do you approach editing?
Yeah, well, half our books are reprints, so I don't edit those at all, and that's great. For the rest, like half the time the authors are dead, so I have a very free hand in the editing. That's also great. Fortunately, the authors who are alive and need to be edited because not need to be edited because the books are bad. Obviously, if a book's bad, I don't buy it. But just need to be edited because they're alive, and you buy a book, you have to do something to it. If only fixing typos. They've all been great. They've all been good to work with. And that's not always the case. I mean, I've had submissions that I liked, and the author has turned out to be so much of a pain in the ass that I'd rather not work with them. And so I don't buy the book, which is a shame sometimes because the book is good, but it's not worth the headache. But all the authors we've actually bought books from have been a pleasure to work with. Some of them fight tooth and nail to keep a certain phrase that they love, even if I think, well, that phrase is a little awkward. That's okay. In the end, they're the author. If they want it the way they say, they get it that way. In the end, they're the ones whose name is on the front of the book. I mean, my name is in there too, somewhere in the fine print, but their name is big. So any author who really cares for a point will win that point with me. But I'm not shy. And I'll go back to the authors and say, I think this book could be improved in the following ways. You tell me if you agree, or if you disagree, tell me why, and let's see if we can find a solution. And I think there are a number of books that have been strengthened that way. I do appreciate that when an author is dead and we're working with the author's son or granddaughter or other heirs, when they have allowed me to make changes to an unpublished manuscript, I'm very grateful for that. There was a book called Honey in His Mouth by Lester Dent. Now, Lester Dent became famous for creating a character called Doc Savage, one of the great pulp action heroes, the Man of Bronze, soon to become a movie or TV series, I think. I heard that online somewhere. But he also wrote a number of non-Doc Savage books, and this was one that he never published. I assume he wrote it toward the end of his life, and it was terrific. A really wonderful pulp novel with an insane premise and lots of fun developments. And it was very clear how the book needed to end, and that's not how the book ended. It was perfect. The book was really good up to the last 10 pages, and those 10 pages needed to be changed. And it was just so clear what the right ending to this book was. Fortunately, I was able to work with the estate, and they agreed. And the current ending, everyone loves it, and I'm thrilled that we were able to make that change. If Dent were alive, I'd like to think that he would have been happy with the change. Of course, who knows? We'll never know. I guess, let me think. Are there any cases where something has been, too hard to fight, and I gave up on it and never, and regret? I can't think of anything I've regretted, really regret. I mean, there are certainly places where I've said, present tense is weird here. Don't use the present tense here. Use past tense for the rest of the book. It's weird to have this one sentence in the present tense, and the author says, yeah, but I like it. Okay, fine. You can have it. Let's not argue over that. But generally, the authors have been really good to work with. It's harder in some ways when we're commissioning cover art, and you have to edit that. I mean, you can't edit art exactly, but go back to the artist and say, we want some changes in the cover art. That doesn't happen too often, but once in a while it does. And that's an interesting challenge, because I know how to edit language. I know how to edit words. I'm a writer myself. I'm not a painter. If you put a paintbrush in my hand, you'll get something unspeakably ugly. I promise. And so when I go to a really great artist and I say, you've done something wonderful here, but it's not working, and I try to explain why, it's hard because I'm not trained as a visual artist. So I don't have the vocabulary for it. Fortunately, Max Phillips, my co-founder and art director, graphic designer, he has an enormous facility with that vocabulary. And he's able to look at a painting and say, the eye socket is too wide on the right. And you think, is that what's wrong? And then the painter changes the eye socket by 1 millimeter. And it's like, oh yeah, that's what was wrong. That's it. You got it. So I'm very grateful that Max is able to do that. He'll say, the left shoulder is not attached in the right way, and here's what you need to do. And I love that. It feels like when you watch one of these cooking shows on TV, and it's one of these master chefs, and they just twist the spatula a little, and suddenly you've got a 7-layer cake. I don't understand how artists do what they do, visual artists, but I'm very grateful to get to work with them.
Yeah. All right. So from the broad to the very specific, okay. I am so interested in that story about the Lester Dent book. If you're almost just kind of redoing the last 10 pages, is that odd to kind of go beyond the scope of simply editing and almost trying to like mimic the voice? Yes. to change the story?
Yeah, so, it is odd. On the other hand, that kind of mimicry is a big part of editing and always has been. You look at the marked up manuscripts of like F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I think the editor was Maxwell Perkins, who was famous for taking a very active hand in editing. Now, Fitzgerald was alive, but here's the guy who wrote The Great Gatsby, and he turns in a manuscript. How do you work on that manuscript? Do you just cut things out, or do you ever put in words? And if Fitzgerald likes how you did it, do your words become part of the permanent record of how Fitzgerald wrote? And I think it's good to propose new words in a book if you think you're able to do it productively, if you're actually contributing something. And of course, with a living writer, they can decide, yes, I like it, no, I don't. In the case of a deceased writer, you feel this enormous responsibility because what you're doing is going to go out over that person's name. But keep in mind that, the last 10 pages of a book out of 300 pages, that's still, well under 10% of the book. And in fact, there was fresh writing in the last 10 pages, but there was plenty that was original to Dent. It's not like the entire last 10 pages were written by me. It's just a paragraph here, a paragraph there to change some basic stuff. The book is about mistaken identity. It's about a dictator in Latin America and a grifter in North America who is a dead ringer for the dictator. And these people who want to stage a coup against the dictator and rob his treasury of some, I forget what the treasure is, but there's some treasure they want to steal. They perform plastic surgery on the grifter to make him look even more like he already looked like the dictator, but they're performing additional surgery to give him a little scar in the right place, so he'll look even more like the dictator. And they're training him. They're making him bone up on facts from the dictator's life, so he'll be able to impersonate him. You can't have that be the setup, and then in the end pages not have him. The end has to play off of the fact that he looks like the dictator. It's just got to. You cannot write that book and not have the ending have something to do with that. It was just that is so obvious. It's beyond obvious. So I did not feel at all guilty. I felt that this was so clearly what Dent was doing, where he was going, and where it needed to go. So I didn't feel bad about that at all. It was tricky in the case of James M. Cain, who was this phenomenal writer of classic novels like Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice. And he had a final manuscript that was unpublished called The Cocktail Waitress. And the thing that was tricky there was he wrote at least 4 or 5 different versions of the book. And so,
oh my God.
Yeah, there was a handwritten version, a typewritten version, there was a first person version, a third person version, and there were scenes that were in one version and not in another. There was the same scene done 2 different ways. And so I had to stitch it together so that you took the best of all the different versions and put it together in a way that was coherent. So that's a different kind of challenge, but it was fun. I was happy to do it.
Your comments on both the Dent book and Fitzgerald's editing reminded me of I had a writer friend, Tyler Jones, beta read a book I have coming out next year. Okay. And
congratulations.
Well, thank you. There were certain parts where he would make a note and say, change this, think about changing this to whatever. And a lot of times I would look at his notes and I'd say, that's a lot better than what I have. And I had, sent him a text at one point. I said, I feel really guilty about, how many of your words I'm like almost verbatim putting in here. And he said, anything that I suggested was inspired by the surrounding story that you wrote. So ergo, totally it's not, it is your voice. It is your story. It's just a different way of looking at it. And that's, kind of totally how I approach.
Yeah. I don't think you should feel guilty. And I don't think I don't feel guilty. In fact, I feel, I can think of all sorts of inappropriate metaphors, but
say them all, Charles.
Yeah, right. It's like, is it like a mortician's assistant who takes the corpse and puts makeup on it? Well, that's not fair. These are great books. They're not corpses. But what is the job of the editor? It's to take the creative work of the writer and present it to its best effect. And whether that means typesetting it in a good font with plenty of air between the lines so that people can read it without getting a headache, or putting a great cover on it so people will be tempted to pick it up and read it in the first place. Those are examples of presenting the book to its best effect. Why wouldn't you, if you know how to fix a broken sentence, why wouldn't you do your best to do that? It's a 100,000 word book, or maybe it's only 60,000 words. And over the course of 60,000 words, you change 500. That's still 59,500 that are the original author's words. Don't feel bad about it. If you can make it better. I think editors sadly have mostly lost the habit of what I think of as real editing. Editing is not just picking the books. It's not just acquiring them. And it's certainly not just writing the back cover copy, although that's important. You have to go in there with your hands, get your hands dirty. It's like, you're a mechanic working on a car. You can't be squeamish about that. You have to turn those lug nuts and get grease on your fingers. And it's the grease on your fingers aspect to editing that makes me feel I'm doing a good job. I want that engine purring. I want the car going beautifully, and the person driving it is the author, and the author's generally grateful if it runs better. So I think I ran that metaphor into the ground. But in any event, I think I agree with you, and I agree with your friend who said that you shouldn't feel you're taking anything unduly, inappropriately from him. I will tell you a story that I think I've shared somewhere else, but maybe not. When I wrote 50 to 1, which was the 50th book we published, and it was sort of a commemoration of all our books. It was a story set 50 years earlier in told in 50 chapters with each chapter named after one of our books. So I took all the books in order. The first book was Grifter's Game. So chapter 1 was called Grifter's Game. Second book was Fade to Blonde. Chapter 2 was called Fade to Blonde. And so I had to make up a story that made logical sense of the 50 book titles in order, which of course was impossible because it didn't make any sense. But I came up with a plot. At one point, I said, speaking of other people's words, I went to Max Phillips, who hadn't written a book himself for years. And I said, I want you to write one chapter of this book. You're the co-founder of the line. I want you to write a chapter of this book. And he wrote a chapter. I gave him all the chapters before that. I told him where it had to end. So, he knew where that chapter had to get to. And he wrote a chapter. And I just thought it was a fun little thing to do. So even though the book bears my name and doesn't bear his, it's 150th written by Max Phillips. And that's people have asked me which chapter it is. It's sort of obvious. We published a book probably around 2009, something like that, 2007, called The Max. So of course he had to write the chapter called The Max.
So Brennan, technically I wrote part of Slattery Falls' debut.
Excellent.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
I like the sound of that.
You're acknowledged.
Charles, have you heard of this book?
What am I looking at? I see a slash. I've got terrible eyes. I see red on the top, white on the bottom. What am
The Kremlin Letter by
No, I haven't seen it. A novel of espionage. What is it? Oh, he looks like a spy.
Yeah, so it's got deckled pages too.
This is great. Wow, look at that.
Yeah, I got a few bucks. If there's a shitload of books at any of those, like not thrift stores, but something of that nature. It's from 66. It's a espionage in the Cold War. I haven't read it yet, but it caught my eye, so I had to buy it.
I love the cover. I love the graphic design of the cover. We don't generally do espionage. Max wrote 2 espionage novels, very much in the style of James Bond novels, set in the period. Cold War spy novels under a fake name. His fake name was Forrest DeVoe Jr., and they were published by HarperCollins, I think. And I thought they were great. The first one was Into the Volcano, and the second was Eye of the Archangel. And we thought about reprinting one of those, maybe both of them. And the thing is, spy fiction and crime fiction aren't the same thing. They're sort of kissing cousins, but they're not quite the same. And so it feels wrong when I've considered doing spy stories in hard case crime. It doesn't feel right, even though I love some. Like Spy Who Came In From the Cold is a brilliant novel. I'd have been proud to publish it, but it doesn't feel like hard case crime. So I read spy fiction, but I don't. We don't buy it. Although I guess you could say 5 Decembers has a spy element to it, but it's barely there. There are other genres we don't do. We don't do serial killers. This isn't a moral thing. It's not some kind of opposition. I like Silence of the Lambs as much as anyone. But it doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right for hard case crime, because serial killer stories are very much of the 70s, 80s, 90s. They're not 40s, 50s. They're the wrong period. If you read a serial killer story, it makes you think of Thomas Harris. It makes you think of CSI. And they're also, they're kind of all the same. Everyone's just doing Thomas Harris. And
that's a lot of sex.
I'm not saying these books aren't good.
Brendan's shaking his head at me.
What?
I was just commentating for the audio folks.
Okay. So the other one is Dan Brown. When Dan Brown became hugely successful for the Da Vinci Code, we would get all these Dan Brown pitches, which would be, a mysterious artifact, a chase through the streets of some European city, puzzles and clues. And I actually love Dan Brown's books. I really do. He's also a very nice guy, but we've never published that kind of book. It just doesn't feel like us. I guess the closest we came to that was when Michael Crichton, just shortly before he died, Michael Crichton had written a number of old potboilers when he was in medical school as a youngster. And one of those had a kind of treasure hunt through Spain aspect to it. So we did that, but that's Michael Crichton. You'll break your own rules for some, like if Thomas Harris wanted to write a book about Hannibal Lecter for us, I'd take it. It's not like I wouldn't take it.
That would be a dumb move not to, man.
Yeah. So Thomas Harris writes anything. I'd be delighted, but that man writes a book every 10 years. So it's not, it's hard. If you're a one every 10 years writer, it's hard to give your one book to a small house like ours. Stephen King at least is prolific enough that giving one of his books to us doesn't mean that he doesn't have plenty of other books to give to his usual publisher.
speaking of Hannibal Lecter, I really would love it if Thomas Harris eventually writes a book about Hannibal when he was actually killing everyone that he was killing.
So filling in the gap, right? Because he did the young Hannibal book, Hannibal Rising.
I did. That's the only one I didn't like.
Yeah, it wasn't that great, but and then of course he did the late ones. But yeah, filling in the gap, maybe at some point he'll do it. It's not impossible. The man needs payday as much as anyone. What have you got there?
I want to jump ahead to David Scow. David Scow. Yeah, he is. He's touched pretty much everything there is to touch in the horror world and in crime. To The Crow being, before I even knew who the writers were, I was a huge fan of that movie. Gunwork.
Gunwork by David J. Scow. That cover has an Easter egg in it, or not exactly an Easter egg, but there's something about that cover that you will only notice once you've read the book. You will not notice it until you've read the book. But when you've read the book, you'll look closer at that art and you'll see that the artist did something very clever and not easy to do. Have you read it yet?
I haven't. It's going to be for my preparation. He's going to be, we haven't announced it, but whatever. He's going to be our season 3 finale guest. But
that's great. So David Scow, he is a great guy and a great fan of crime fiction, fan of Donald Westlake, fan of hard case crime. I did 2 books with him. Gunwork is one, which is the one hard case crime book. We also did a series of adventure novels, sort of in the Indiana Jones vein, called The Adventures of Gabriel Hunt. And we did one of those books together called Hunt Among the Killers of Men. And all the Hunt books had the word hunt in there you are, Hunt Among the Killers of Men. Not too many people have that book. And so I love working with him. We've talked from time to time about doing another book together. I think that'd be great. He's such a gifted writer. Just sentence by sentence. His sentences are delicious. And I don't know why more people don't read his books. I think he should be a bestseller up there with anyone.
So he sells his books on his Facebook, and that's how I got him. I bought him from him.
He's been sort of self-publishing. I think he created a new imprint, a new book line to self-publish his own books, and now he's branched out into publishing other people's as well. One of his great talents is as a writer of short stories. He's written far more short stories than novels. Of course, that's not a surprise. Like, most people have written more short stories than novels, but his short stories are particularly good. So if you get a collection of his short stories, you're going to be in for a treat.
Seeing Red, I know that's his.
In Red, Fallen Angels, I think. Maybe I'm getting the Lost Angels. I think it's the Lost Angels.
Lost
Angels. In any event, I'm going to get the titles wrong, but there are a bunch of really good short story collections. He was kind enough to send me a few of the more recent editions, and I have them on my shelf, and I dole stories out to myself one at a time, and they're delicious. They're like little savage bonbons.
That's a tasty analogy there. Brendan, I think I cut you off like halfway through your series of questions.
If I was going somewhere, that train has left the station.
That's okay. Well, so if your fans are horror fans, a couple of other sort of tips of the hat for horror fans. Daniel Kraus, who you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Blood Sugar.
Blood Sugar is a scary book. He's a very good writer and wrote in a style that nobody else would have attempted. It's bold, brave, weird. He wrote the entire book in a kind of weird argot, a weird slang. It's told by a street kid in street slang, and the kid is told you shouldn't be swearing so much, so he makes up fake swear words and he replaces actual curses with fake curses, and you have to get used to that. It's weird, but it's wonderful. It's hilarious. It's weird. It's gross, and it's one of my favorite books, and a lot of people didn't get it. A lot of people picked it up and they said, "What the hell is this?" And I just think it's great.
I loved it, man. I thought it was like I saw the relationship or the analogy of someone saying this is like a Clockwork Orange, and I agree.
Yeah, because it's told in a weird language, and you have to get into the head of these people who are going through some weird experiences. But it's actually a very sweet book and tender and heartbreaking, and the villain is really gross, which is always fun. I think the only other writer that's sometimes classed as a writer of horror, and maybe I'm forgetting someone, is Ray Bradbury. And for his 100th birthday, so Ray sadly died. He lived a very long life. He was in his 90s, I think, when he died, but he died before his 100th birthday. But we wanted to commemorate his 100th birthday, so we did a collection for the first time ever of his crime fiction. There was one collection as a paperback that was done while he was alive that he never liked very much, and he refused to allow it to be reprinted because I think out of 20 or so stories in that collection, 6 were really, really good, but 6 out of 20 is not that great a number. So I said, okay, let's do this right. Let's do the right collection of his crime fiction. We'll take the 6 good ones from that book, and then we'll get 14 other really good ones. And we did a book called Killer Come Back to Me, which is...
I love that cover so much.
Oh, yeah. That's Paul Mann. So that's one of my favorite covers right there. Killer Come Back to Me is the best crime fiction by Ray Bradbury. And needless to say, when it's Ray Bradbury, you have elements of horror and science fiction, supernatural come into it. And so there's scary stuff in there too. So if you're a horror fan, those are some of the ones that you might go for.
Robert Bloch, you got him too.
Oh yeah. So right, Robert Bloch, father of Psycho. Bloch did a couple of paperback originals, and we did 2 of them back to back in the sort of old what we call the Ace doubles style. So there was a publisher called Ace. I think there still is. I think there's an imprint called Ace somewhere, maybe part of Berkeley. Anyway, Ace did doubles, which were these books that were done toe to tail. So you read one book first, and when you got halfway through the volume, you turned the book upside down and read the other book the other direction. So the book had 2 front covers, no back cover. And we did 2 short block novels that way. I think each one was about 50,000 words. And one was called Shooting Star. One was called Spiderweb. They're fun. So yeah, Bloch was, I did get to work once very briefly with Bloch toward the end of his life. He did an introduction for a collection of mystery stories that I edited. And by reputation, he was just a sweetheart. And I dealt with him through other people. So I never got to meet him, sadly. But everyone who knew him loved him. And Scow is one of the people who knew him well. And I think you should talk to him about Bloch.
That's a good, I didn't know that he knew.
I'm pretty sure. I'm 99% sure. I have it in my head that he knew Bloch well. If I'm wrong,
he probably did.
I'm pretty sure. And then there are some old timers like Cornell Woolrich or Woolrich. I don't actually know which pronunciation is correct. He wrote the story that became the Hitchcock movie Rear Window. His novels are suspense that are just bone cracking suspense. I mean, there rarely is a supernatural element, once in a while, but they're scary books. They're really suspenseful, really tense books. And we did a book of his called Fright, which, as you can tell from the title, is not the happiest novel. And so he's kind of a horror writer after a fashion. And that one's out of print at this point, but you can probably find a used copy on eBay or ABE Books.
And you got Joyce Carol Oates too, who's jack of all trades.
You're absolutely right. So Joyce Carol Oates wrote a book 50 years ago that was basically about the Manson murders. So basically the same premise or the same milieu as the Tarantino movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And she published it shortly after the Manson murders. And it's about a maniac. He's called the Maniac, who's demented. He's completely insane. And she writes it from his point of view. And so she's writing it in this fractured, insane style that's very hard to read, but beautiful. And so you're deep inside the brain of this delusional psychotic. And he's having hallucinations. You don't know whether what he says is real or not real. And he commits brutal murders. And you get a certain sense of why he is the way he is, but you don't ever have sympathy for him. But yeah, it's a hell of a book. I mean, it's a real virtuoso tour de force book, hard to read. And I highly recommend it. But it's like Blood Sugar. It's one of those books that a lot of people don't want to put the work into reading, but if you do, it's very rewarding.
The cover looks pretty neat too.
Yep, that's another McGinnis cover.
I wanted to ask you because the first few books I read in your line were first person, and okay. I was wondering, is there a particular magnetism you have for that narration style? I
like first person. My first two novels were written in the first person. I think it's immediate. It gets you right into the action. There's no filter or barrier between you and the main character. So if a man's on the run, you're on the run with him. If a man's taking a punch, you get socked in the jaw. It feels very much like you're, seeing the world through that person's eyes. So it can be done well or badly, but when it's done well, it's very immersive. It throws you right into the world of the book, which isn't to say third person can't do that too. It can, but it's a technique that fits our line very well. I have never done the analysis to see what percentage of our books are first person versus third person. For all I know, more of them are third person, but Lawrence Block does it very well. There are a number of first person books in the line. And, there's someone like Woolrich will have a purple writing style. It's like Edgar Allan Poe. It's very ornate, poetic. It has long sentences. Other people like Day Keen, my model, when I get a submission and the submission is overwritten and too purple, my model is Day Keen, and I write to people and I say, okay, this is what the first sentence of a hard case crime novel should be like. Day Keen, novel called Home is the Sailor. By the way, a fantastic book, Home is the Sailor. The first sentence is, it was night. That's it. That's the sentence. Don't elaborate. 3 words. That's it. And then the second sentence, I think, is, it was hot. And you're in the terse world of tough guys when you have 2-3 word sentences, and that's your entree into the book. That's not first person versus third, but it's part of the same spirit.
For sure. Let's see, for David J. Scouse.
Oh yeah, what is his first sentence? There you go. That's
actually, this will be new for me too.
I don't even remember.
That's a lot longer. Okay, it's an entire paragraph.
More than 3 words.
Nope, that's a whole paragraph.
Okay, forget what I said.
Never mind.
Look, you don't have to do it, but I
was trying to prove your point, David.
Yeah, good luck. All right, you're gonna embarrass me. No, I think Keene was an exceptional avatar of the terse school. There are people who write longer sentences, but I'll tell you this: the longer your sentence, the better you have to be at it. So
that's wow. Yeah.
If you're constructing your book out of short sentences, you still have to be a good writer, but you don't have to have quite the same sense of rhythm within a sentence, because you only have so many words. I'll say this, for instance, Woolrich was a poet. I don't think he ever wrote poetry formally, but his prose was poetic, and he always used just the right word, just the right phrase, and it just knocks you for a loop every time you read Woolrich. Raymond Chandler was like that, where you read a page of Chandler, and if you don't stop to reread 3 sentences on the page, it's a surprise, because his sentences were just so delicious. He would say things in ways that felt like no one had ever said them that way before. And they were so clever, so smart, so funny, so interesting. If you're not Chandler and you're not Woolrich, don't write that way, because second-rate Chandler is far worse than second-rate Day Keen. Like, second-rate Day Keen is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. If instead of writing "it was hot," you write "it was cold," that's still a fine sentence. But if you do second-rate Cornell Woolrich, you seem like an idiot. You're just doing weird, semi-poetic things that aren't good. And bad Chandler is the worst thing on earth. People who do these bad Private Eye stories where they say his battleship, his desk was no larger than a battleship. And it's like, I've read that line, literally that same line in like 20 submissions. His desk was no larger than a battleship. It's like, come up with something original, come up with something that no one's ever said before. Bad Chandler reads like pastiche, reads like parody. And you have to be very careful. When you're writing in our genre, which is an old genre, it's like, if you're writing a Western, you have to be very careful that you're not Blazing Saddles, right? Blazing Saddles is great, but if you're not trying to be comedy, you have to be careful. And if you're doing hardboiled detective with a fedora and a hat and a bottle of whiskey in the drawer, it's so easy to slip into Bob Hoskins and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right? So if you want to be taken seriously, you've got to be careful. You got to be careful.
I always think of the library cop from Seinfeld when I think of bad noir.
that kind
of Bookman.
Yeah.
I love Seinfeld. It'd be perfect to work with you guys about, we're talking about rereading, would be Joe Lansdale. I love his work.
Yeah. Lansdale. So we've talked to him, and so Lansdale is phenomenal and a nice guy. And we've never hit the right book, because in most of it, so he sent me a couple of the books that he did early in his career that might be good candidates to be reprinted, and they tip just a little too far towards horror. Some of his more recent books are very much in the noir, hard-boiled crime vein.
Sure.
but I don't know that we pay enough for a guy like Joe Lansdale. I think we may not have enough money to get Joe Lansdale, but he is terrific. He's an absolutely wonderful writer. There are a number of those, like Dan Simmons. If I'm remembering correctly, he did 3 books in a series that would be a perfect series for us. And he thought about doing a 4th book, never did it. I'd love to get that 4th book. That would be great. I'm trying to think of some of the other authors we've approached. There are people who won't let you reprint their early stuff. Like there's a guy named Alan First who writes World War II, very serious, well-respected World War II spy novels. When he started his career, he wrote a book that was hilarious and really good about a pot dealer smuggling. It was nothing like what he writes today. And I've gone to him 3 times and said, hey, come on, that book's great. And it's a great book. It was nominated for the Edgar Award. It was terrific. Best first novel.
Oh my God.
He won't let us reprint it. He won't let anyone reprint it because I think his current fans, I think he's concerned that his current fans who know him for something much more sober and much more serious and much more proper, what would they think if we, under his name, it was this goofy caper about a pot dealer. So.
That's such a weird, mindset to me, because it's like, do you like Brennan's one of my best friends.
Yeah.
Do I just like him when he's being funny and he has this Jerry Seinfeld drive? I love everything about him, even when he's being a dick.
Well, I don't mind if an author says, if an author says, look, I wrote that book early in my career and I think it sucks. I think it's a bad book. That's why I won't let you reprint it, because it's a bad book. That I respect. That's total fine. And in fact, if they're right, then I don't want to reprint it. Yeah. But when it's a good book, and it's like objectively a good book because it was nominated for an award and it deserved it
for that award,
and the author doesn't say it was a bad book. He says, it's just not what people want from me now. Then I feel a little worse about it. But I mean, I still respect it, of course, but I feel a little worse because we're denying readers a real pleasure. Sue Grafton, who wrote the Alphabet Mysteries, A is for Alibi, B is for Burglar, died sadly after doing Y is for Yesterday, I think. She never got to Z, but she was so close. Before she started that series, she wrote a book that was very different in style about moonshine gun runners in the Deep South. And I wanted to get that reprinted. And she said no, because for the same reason, which was all her fans who picked up A is for Alibi all the way through Y, they would expect it to be Kinsey Milhone. They'd expect it to be like the Alphabet Mysteries. And it's just so different. And she just didn't want to give them the shock of picking up one of her books, expecting one kind of book and getting another and being disappointed. So I respect that.
I totally get that. But, like in movies, I love it when a comedian just comes out of the blue. Like with Adam Sandler, I saw Uncut Gems in theaters. I was blown away and it was amazing. And
Jerry Lewis in King of Comedy. If you haven't seen it, go see the King of Comedy. It's great. Especially if you saw and like Joker, because Joker is really riffing on stuff that Martin Scorsese did in The King of Comedy 30 years earlier. And Jerry Lewis plays a serious part in that movie, or the TV series Wise Guy, where he played a serious part. There are a number of comedians that have done that sort of. Robin Williams, of course, famously did a number of serious movies that he was great in.
Jason Bateman, how he came out with Ozark. I mean,
I love Jason Bateman, but I can't help thinking of his sister Justine Bateman every time I see him. I see Justine Bateman because I had a big crush on her when I was watching Family Ties as a kid.
Yeah,
that dates me. That shows how old I am.
Brennan, go ahead, buddy.
With what?
I felt like you were asking.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I thought you wanted me to lead us somewhere in particular.
No, we can go to what are you reading if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that.
All right, Charles, what are you currently reading?
All right, that's an interesting question. So here's why it's an interesting question. I'm always reading things as candidates to reprint.
Sure.
And I don't want to give away secrets because I don't want one of my competitors to say, there's a good idea. I'm going to tell you, though, what I am reading. So there are 2 novels that are lost novels by Graham Greene. Now, Graham Greene was a huge major author, became famous for any number of very serious books like The Power and the Glory and The Human Factor and Orient Express, which had a different title originally, This Gun for Hire. Anyway, Graham Greene wrote probably 30 books, and his second and third book he refused to allow ever to be reprinted. He decided he didn't like them, and he didn't want them to be reprinted. And so they've only appeared once in a single edition each in 1931 and 1933, and never since. So these books are almost a century old. And this famous author, who was brilliant, great author, these books have not been read by anyone in 90 years. So I thought I've got to read these books. So I tracked down copies from rare book dealers. I ordered them, paid too much money for them. and I've been reading them. So I read the first, I'm halfway through the second. The problem is they're actually bad. They're actually bad.
Oh, no.
Great writer, sentence by sentence. Some of the sentences are beautiful. I remember one description: a guy goes to a German town between the wars, between World War I and World War II. Since it was written in 31, he didn't know it was between the wars. I mean, there was no World War II yet when he wrote it, but we know it's between the wars. And a clock chimes, and I think he described it as somewhere a clock. I'm going to get the verb wrong. I want to say relinquished its load of hours. I thought that's a lovely phrase. The clock relinquished its load of hours.
Never heard of that before.
Yeah, no, nor will you ever again. So the book's not good. The book's not good. And I wish it were, because I would love to go to the Green Estate and try to persuade them to let us publish it. But I kind of can see why he shut it down.
That sucks.
Yeah, it's a shame. But I mean, I'm reading good things too. But that's I'll show you one of the things. Hang on. Oh, there's this author who sent us a submission. Guy's name is Bede Scott, Bede Scott, and the book's called Too Far from Antibes. This is a book that felt a little bit too much like a spy story, a little bit too much like international intrigue, not quite a hard case crimes thing, and but really good, really well written. In fact, written sort of in the style of Graham Greene. He's a really good writer, and he ended up selling it. It was hardly a step down. It was sold to Penguin Books. And he sent me a copy of the finished book, and I started reading it again. So I read maybe the first half of it when it was a submission. And as soon as I realized it wasn't for us, I didn't read the rest. But I've started to read it now, and it's great. It's really, really good. So I recommend Too Far from Antibes by Bede Scott, if you can get a copy. And I think it was published by their international imprint. I forget. I assume you can find it on Amazon. You can find anything on Amazon. So that's better. So I'm reading Graham Greene, and a book inspired by Graham Greene. And the best of the three is the book inspired by Graham Greene.
Excellent. Before we Patrick and I weigh in, let's take this time to promote any upcoming releases that Hardcase has.
Sure.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks. So our next book coming in the summer. I have finished copies from the printer already. It's not in the stores yet until June, I think early June, but maybe it's sometime in June, is a book called The Next Time I Die by Jason Starr. By the way, this is one of our rare cases that does tip over the edge into horror and specifically science fiction. It's sort of a Philip K. Dick, Twilight Zone style story. There's a man in a crumbling marriage. His wife wants a divorce. She's cheating on him. He's about to go to trial. He's a lawyer. He's about to go to trial, try to defend a serial killer. He knows the guy's actually a killer, but he's got to defend him. Anyway, he's having a bad night. His wife just asked for a divorce. He's driving to a gas station on a snowy night, and he sees a woman getting beaten up by this thuggish guy, and he steps in to defend her and gets a knife to his chest, and he's killed. And then he wakes up in the hospital. And he's got no wound on his abdomen. And the doctors are saying, your head injury is better. Head injury? What head injury? His wife comes in. She loves him. She adores him. Here's your daughter. She's so worried about you. Daughter? I didn't have a daughter. He wanted a daughter. He wanted a child. He was childless. He looks in his bank account. He's got more money than he's ever had before. There's a different president in the White House. 9/11 never happened. Everything about this world seems better than the world he came from. He's in an alternate universe. The only problem is, the more he learns about who he is in this universe, he doesn't seem like a very nice guy. And for some reason, the police are after him. But he has no idea why. Because he doesn't know who he is in this universe. So when the police come and ask him a question like, where were you last Wednesday night? He has no idea where he was last Wednesday night. How do you even answer that question? But you can't answer it, I was in another universe, officer, right? It's a wonderful book. It's called The Next Time I Die by Jason Starr. It does have a serial killer element to it. It has a lot of really scary stuff in it, and an ending that will that'll throw you for a loop. It's coming out in June. After that, we have a reissue of a very old and forgotten book that was never published under its author's real name, called The Hot Beat, which was written by Robert Silverberg, a grandmaster of the science fiction writers of America, not known for crime fiction, but he did write some crime fiction early on. He wrote this under a fake name. The fake name was Stan Vincent, and nobody ever read it, called The Hot Beat. Great old lurid pulp story. That's coming in September, I think. And then at the end of the year, we've got a big hardcover, which is really good, by Max Allan Collins, who was the author of the graphic novel Road to Perdition that became the movie with Tom Hanks and Jude Law and Paul Newman. And also he created a series of books about a hitman named Quarry, which became a Cinemax TV series. Really good writer. He has a signature detective named Nathan Heller, who always solves real crimes, as in the author will find an actual historical crime, a true crime. He'll do all the research into the true crime that he would need to do to write the definitive true crime book about it. And instead, he writes a private eye novel in which his private eye solves this actual historical crime. And he always proposes a solution, and he's really good at it. So you come away reading the book thinking, I bet he's right. I bet that's what really happened. And, sometimes he probably is. Anyway, the book's called The Big Bundle, and it's about a kidnapping that really happened in 1953. And it was, some kid got kidnapped, and it was the biggest ransom in the history of the United States up to that point. And half the ransom money was never recovered. And Jimmy Hoffa was involved. Robert Kennedy was involved in weird ways. And it's terrific. It's called The Big Bundle. It's going to be a hardcover in December, just in time for Christmas. And I highly recommend that. But you have to wait 6 months for that one. You only have to wait 6 weeks, or not even 6 weeks. For Jason Starr's The Next Time I Die. And if your readers, listen to me, I'm so old fashioned. If your listeners, if your viewers are horror fans, they will definitely like The Next Time I Die.
Very
Jason
cool.
Starr.
Yeah, those sound fascinating.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I will
Patrick,
have to get you copies.
Sure.
I will grudgingly accept.
There you go. What are you reading?
I just finished 5 Decembers. Okay. So the next book that I was going to dive into was Jonathan Mayberry's. Man, I'm going to mess up the first. How do you pronounce it, Brennan?
I don't know. I say Kagan, but it's a book, so I've never heard it out loud. Kagan the Damned.
It's kind of
or Kajan the Damned, depending on how you pronounce it.
Yeah, it's an epic fantasy, and I'm starting it tomorrow, so I can't really speak as to what it's about, but I'm reading that, and yeah. And the other one that I'm reading is called Anybody Home. I don't have that with me down here. It is transgressive, I guess, would be the genre. Basically, it goes through breaking into homes as a show, and it gets brutal though, and it breaks down home invasions, but in a kind of a new way, at least that I've read it as. And
I'll check that
it's
out.
just interesting. It's like the older generation telling the newer guys, like, this is what to do. This is the kind of blueprints of it. It's real neat. Brady, what about you, man?
I'm also reading Jonathan Mayberry's fantasy, Kajan the Damned, in case you were wondering who we're talking to next week. And it's really cool. I'm about 30 or 40% into it, and it is a whopper of a book. So 30 or 40% is a lot of work. But it's, Jonathan is, big part of the HWA. He kind of writes all over the place, but he's primarily known as a horror guy. So you see the Lovecraft elements kind of make their way into more like sword and sorcery fantasy, and it's a really cool mashup. I'm having fun with it. And I also am reading, we were talking about Don Winslow earlier, I'm reading The Power of the Dog. I got this in the mail yesterday. I'm 100 pages in because I can't put it down. it's really cool. It's one of those books where you read a chapter and you're introduced to certain characters in a certain setting. And then the next chapter is just there's no relation. It's its own kind of self-contained, very intriguing story. And then, by the time you hit around that 100-page mark, you're starting to see these very
pull together.
Yeah, you're starting to see the threads touch. And you're imagining where it's going from there. But he has a way of writing that just won't let you put the book down, that I'm really, really digging.
Where can people follow you, Charles? Or Hardcase Crime?
Hardcasecrime.com is our website, and you can find sample chapters from every one of our books there. You can see all our covers, all free. You can't order our books directly from us, but you can get them through any bookseller. We have an Instagram and we have a Twitter, and if you search on Insta or Twitter, you'll find us. I forget exactly how many underscores you need to get our name, so I'm not even going to try. Hard underscore case, whatever it is. But in any event, if you search for Hardcase Crime, you'll find us. And we'll post, our new covers. We'll post those online as they come up. And sometimes if I get really grouchy about a particularly bad submission, I'll post that online too, and that's fun. But I mean, probably not fun for the person who submitted it, but I never give names. So I feel a little bad when I do it, but sometimes a submission's just so funny, I've got to do it. So you can find us on social media, and you can find us in bookstores. You can find us on the web, and also on this outstanding podcast. That's where you find me.
Thanks, man. Do you have any final thoughts?
Sure. Listen, I feel like I owe you some thanks. Hardcase Crime is not squarely in your bullseye. I mean, we're close. We're not too far off, but letting us talk to your fans and your listeners and your viewers is great. I would love for Hardcase Crime to reach more people. That would be great. We're a little tiny labor of love boutique operation. We have a staff of 0. It's me and Max and our friends at Titan helping us out. And once in a while, we have a book that breaks out in a really big way. 5 Decembers broke out in its way. Of course, Stephen King is a whole other category. But our typical book will, it needs love, it needs attention. And so if you read one of our books and you love it, tell your friends, tell people that this is a good book that they're going to enjoy. It means the world. And since we can't afford to do the kind of marketing you do on billboards in Times Square, word of mouth is how our books find their proper homes.
It means a lot to me that you came on, because I love your line.
I'm thrilled. Anytime. Happy to come back.
Well, we'll take you up on that offer. And we love talking to people in the crime noir, and like Sean Cosby came on a few times. We'll have Eli come on eventually. I already talked to him about that. We'd love to have James on too. But yeah, crime is a fun, really fun genre.
It is. It overlaps. When I try to shelve books, it's like Silence of the Lambs. Where does that go? Is it horror or crime? Right. So you've got supernatural. Right. Exactly. There's supernatural horror. Does that go in fantasy? And you have non-supernatural horror. Does that go in crime? And similarly, crime sometimes overlaps. Like Isaac Asimov's book, The Naked Sun. That's a detective story. It has robots in it. Where do you shelve it? It's everything interpenetrates. That's the nature of the world. But I do love crime. It's just my first love. I'm also a science fiction fan. I'm also a fantasy fan, of course, horror, but crime. Somehow I've found my home here, and it's a dirty, mean street, but it's home.
That's awesome. Brennan, final thoughts.
It's a great way to put it. A dirty, mean street, but it's home. No, Charles, we appreciate your time so much, man. And we love what you're doing. We wouldn't have you on if we didn't love what you were doing. The whole package, the idea of just kind of recreating, and in some ways, literally recreating that 40s and 50s era of pulp paperbacks that come in a nice little condensed package with this beautiful throwback cover. And like I said earlier, they're lean and mean. They're great reads. And you've been doing this for a while, and we
longer than I ever thought I would. Thank you guys. That means the world. And just keep on reading them, and I'll keep churning them out.
My final thoughts are, again, thank you for your time, Charles. Brian, thank you for being my co-pilot, sir. And listeners and viewers, thank you for sticking around. And please do check out those books, review them, and reach out to the authors if you like them. If you don't, Keep that to yourself. Next episode, 149. You know, you got to say that, though, sometimes, because you hear from plenty of authors how people are just, it's just this weird industry where they think because they bear their soul into art that you have a right to be a dick to them and be like, yeah, fuck this. I don't like it. It's a strange mindset. So next episode is 149 with Jonathan Mayberry. He's the man behind Run Indie Show with he doesn't want me to say that, but with Weird Tales. We're going to be talking about his new book, amongst many other things.
And we're going to learn how to say the title.
That's it. You'll find out.
Yeah. This has been a pleasure. Charles Ardai.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's plural. Have a wonderful night.
And you too, everybody. You've had many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.